And we are live. Welcome to the Sesh podcast. And today I'm James Evans and I will be hosting today's podcast. Unfortunately, Mason is currently away. He cannot join us. But who needs Mason, right? When you got David Amoyal. David, how are you doing, mate?
It's a real pleasure to be on. Thank you so much for having me.
I appreciate all the time you can give me. I mean, you're one of the sporting kings, combats of football. I mean, I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm a huge admirer of your work. So just to get you on, really, I mean, I'm literally in awe right now. So I appreciate your time. And let's kick things off, really. Tell us a bit about yourself, really. What about your background, how you got into journalism, what you currently do now?
Sure. So, first of all, when people refer to me as a journalist, I always get a little bit uncomfortable. I work with great journalists, and, when you gave me such a nice introduction, I right away, thought I'm very lucky to work with some truly great people. So, my day job's in finance. Actually, right now I'm on my break at work to chat with you. And, I've been working in finance for a while here in Boston in the US, but I did grow up in Italy. I always had a big passion for calcio, as we call it in Italy, football. I'm 43 years old. I lived through the glory days of Serie A living in Italy in the 80s. Even well before you were born, Serie A was so strong that we had players like Zico, a real legend on a team like Udinese, who, is a lower table team even back then. So, Calcio was unbelievable back then. I got really swept up into it. Even as a child, I had a big passion for transfers for some reason, as I always really enjoyed transfers. I'm the guy that on FIFA spends probably more time on career mode, building the team, making sales and that than the actual games. And so, fast forward to, I became an adult, had a job, and, I was like, I like my job, but I don't feel like I have a huge passion for it the way I have for football. So I started about 10 years ago writing about, calcio on a few sites. I, became pretty good. More than anything, I had a weekly column that I took great pride in that taught me the importance of perseverance and staying on top and having a schedule. So that taught me that. And then about 8 years ago now already, Gianluca Di Marzio, who, obviously I'm sure everyone knows, listening, he became very famous with transfers. He broke that Guardiola was going to Bayern Munich. That made him a star internationally. This was really a while back. And I saw that he had a website where he was talking about transfers in Serie A. So I reached out and I told him, I was like, hey, I think you should really be doing this in English. There's a huge audience. There's nobody in English that's accurate about transfers. Now things have really improved. But 8 years ago, it was the wild, wild west with transfers. And I was like, this guy's really good. We need to get a bigger audience. And, we were lucky. I was lucky that we were kind of from the same town in a way. I grew up in Padova. His dad used to coach the team. He lived there for a while. So Italy can be pretty parochial. I think the fact that I told him, oh, I'm from Padova, that we had some friends in common, he was like, oh, okay, let's try this out. There's a lot of skepticism, but I knew that the English page would be a huge success. And right around that same time when I started on the site and I was posting the articles in Italian in English. And that's why, I always laugh when people call me a reporter or journalist. It's like, that's how I started, was doing that. But there was also Fabrizio Romano, who used to be basically a photographer more than anything. The pictures that you see of medicals, of players arriving at the airport, the pictures of a sporting director being in a city. Back then, Fabrizio would often be the guy taking those pictures. And, things have grown since then, to say the least, like, especially for Fabrizio. And, I kept building on the site, Di Marzio's site. I got a lot of followers because people wanted to get his news in English. And that was always from the beginning, that was my goal, is I believed in myself. I believed in my own work. And I was like, I just need a way to get an audience. And that was how I got an audience, was through their work. So that worked out great. And then, I started writing for ESPN, which for a while was a dream of mine. Here in the US, all my favorite writers at the time were on ESPN. That was really a big step for me. Then I started writing for The Athletic, getting really into writing. I consider myself a writer, not a journalist. And, I've had my podcast for close to 4 years now, Calcioland. That's been going really, really well. I really appreciate it. In the UK, the pod's been a great success. Last year I was in London. I even had two people recognize me in the street, something that would never happen here in the US, that's for sure. And yeah, so it's been good. I've been working and working. I put that in air quotes in football as a second job. It's become a second job. It started as a hobby, and it's been a lot of fun. So that's kind of my journey, and that's how I ended up with you wanting to invite me on your show. So that's how it all started.
And obviously, you do touch upon writing for ESPN, The Athletic, and Gianluca Di Marzio. Do you have to sort of change your writing style in a way to sort of suit your employers, or are they quite flexible in how you produce content for their sites?
Oh, I loved it. That's a wonderful question. No, I've definitely noticed that it's a lot about the audience that you write for. So, I used to write a lot about Italian football mainly. Obviously, when I got to ESPN, their audience is much more focused on the Premier League. So, I was told, you want to write about transfers, that's great. People might not care that Lazio is buying, a backup left winger, but what they really do care about is Pogba going to Man United. So if you need to write about that every week, that's what you're going to do. So that was fine. Look, it was a dream of mine to write on ESPN. So I did it. On The Athletic, I had a very tough editor, but that editor made me a much better writer. I was used to usually just posting my own columns, and that was it. So I would write them and hit submit. At ESPN, I'd email my column to my editor. He would change a few things, but he would just post it. He'd make the changes that he wanted, and then I'd read it, and I always wanted to see, let me see what he changed so I can do better next time. But at The Athletic, it was a really collaborative effort where, everything the editor wanted to change, we went over, and everything that I put, a factual thing, you always had to back it up, which made me an incredibly better writer. So yeah, absolutely. It's a great question that you asked. I always tell, when people ask me for advice, I always tell them, try to make it the least bit possible about you and make it about what the audience wants to hear. I always get, a little skeptical when I hear a lot of people making it a lot about them. Now, I do know that maybe with younger people, that also tends to work quite well. People like personality and whatnot, but I've always tried to make it really about the work and try not to make it as much as possible about me.
With footballing fans, obviously, when you mention the summer and the winter window, the transfer deadlines and all that, they get all excited. They're licking their lips. They're always looking for that breaking news story. And you see with Fabrizio Romano going about in his day-to-day life, going across Italy, trying to break that news. For you as a writer, what's the summer and the transfer and the winter window like for you? Because it must be pretty hectic for you. What's your daily routine like?
So that's a great question. And look, I'm not a reporter like Gianluca and Fabrizio. Those guys are out getting the news. Now, look, I've been fortunate. I've gotten to know a lot of people. That has been one of my favorite part about this journey is I've become friends with pretty much almost any journalist that I really, really looked up to. And that's been wonderful. And I've also, come across some player agents, people at teams. So once in a while, people tell me stuff too. But I leave that work to Gianluca and Fabrizio. They are way better at it than I will ever be. So my job is really more to make sure that news has a bigger audience. I see my role as that. So, we have the English site on Di Marzio's site. I started that my first summer. I was the only one doing the updates in English. And it's insane how much time I spent on it. There's the evening transfer blitz, which is at 11 o'clock in Italy, 5 nights a week. And basically that summer, like no matter what, I never missed that. So I had to cover that all the time. And again, it taught me perseverance, but I also learned the importance of delegation. So now I have a large team. I have 7 great guys that with me, we update the site. I try to find people that have the same profile as me. I'm looking for someone that's going to benefit by this by getting a bigger audience. So if I know someone that's a good writer and that's struggling to get the audience, I tell them, I was like, hey, I know this is kind of a grunt work. You're doing an English version of a transfer report, but it's going to get you an audience. And then it's up to you what you're going to do with that audience. It's worked out very well for me. It's worked out for some other people that work for me. I've had one guy, Gianmarco, who is now one of the admins at Roma's English page, which is probably as great a job as you can have with that. So yeah, so now I have a bigger team. So my routine in the transfer windows is, make sure the site is updated. We know a lot of the news is going to come at 11 p.m. in Italy with the TV show, but a lot of times news breaks throughout the day. So, just like right now, I'm on break at work, but sometimes news breaks when I'll be in a meeting. And also it's good to have a team to take care of that. Obviously, going back to your question on the audience and the importance of knowing your audience, it's like obviously on the English page, people are going to mainly want to know the news that has to do with the Premier League. So I always tell the staff on my team that, look, if 3 reports basically come out at the same time, and one of them maybe is not the most prominent Italian player, but it involves a Premier League team, guess which one's being done first? That one. So we do a good job with that. Again, different audience site in Italy and the rest of the world. So that works out well. So try to stay on top of that. And look, a lot of that news that comes generated on the site is then what I use for my own content. So I'm always then trying to see, okay, how can I position this transfer news? What value can I bring on my podcast or my articles on this? So I try to explain, I have a background in finance. I work in finance. I'm a principal here in the US. I manage financial advisors. And so I understand finance. And, I'd like to think I'm pretty good at explaining things in a way that most people can understand. So I always try to take that news that comes there and incorporate it in my work. So, twice a week we have the podcast, and then I do articles as well. Unfortunately with COVID, I was not a full-time employee at ESPN or The Athletic. I was a freelance, and a lot of freelance work's been shut down. So that I don't have, which, kind of maybe turned in a way was kind of a blessing in disguise, as it really had become a lot of work. And I really enjoyed the podcast. Has really become my favorite thing to do. Is that, I have a great co-host. That Alex Goldberg has now become like more popular and more famous than I will ever be. And that's fantastic. That's his career, and that's great. And, to me, that's really awesome. So another thing that I tell people is, don't be afraid to surround yourself with talent. I think it's really, really important. I know sometimes it can be a little intimidating. And also don't be, I'm not the least bit upset that Alex is much more popular than I will ever be. Even in some ways, Fabrizio Romano outside of Italy has surpassed Di Marzio. Now in Italy, that's not the case. In Italy, Di Marzio will remain king. But internationally, Fabrizio and a lot has leapfrogged them because he's really looked at the audience and really changed his course. So also don't be afraid to surround yourself with talent, but also know that someday that talent can really leapfrog you. But I don't have a big ego with that stuff. My main job's finance, and if I'm working with great people, it's going to make me that much better anyways.
And you touched upon your podcast, obviously. Certainly in this day and age, the podcast sort of industry has just grown massively worldwide. You're the host of the Calcioland Podcast. How did that come about? And, do you enjoy what, for those who don't know, what sort of stuff do you talk about on the podcast?
Great. Thanks for the plug. So, yeah, it started almost 4 years ago. And back then, podcasts were somewhat popular. Like here in the US, podcasts have been very popular for a long time. I gather in the UK, they are more popular than in most other places in Europe, not just because of the listeners that I have, but in general, I've been doing research on that. But podcasts have been very popular here. My favorite writer in any sport is Bill Simmons. He covers more the NBA. He used to be at ESPN. Now he heads The Ringer. And, he had a podcast. And one thing that I really loved about his work, even before he had a podcast, is he always combined, sports with movies, music, things like that. And I have a huge passion for movies and music, maybe even more than football. So when I saw that he was combining the two, I was like, that's really cool. And when I started my podcast, there were, I want to say, a couple of Italian football podcasts, but they were more team specific. I don't think there was really one covering the entire league. And so I wanted to start that. And the other thing that I knew is that I knew a lot of journalists, and I knew a lot of not just journalists in Italy, not just journalists in the US and the UK, but a lot in Italy. But you never heard these great journalists in Italy in English. Like if you spoke Italian, great. If not, they just didn't even really think that. And I was like, I really should be getting these guys on my show. So before I started my podcast, I wrote down all the things that I had that were fairly unique and that could be a good success for the podcast. And, one thing that I needed was a producer and a co-host. And back then, Alex Goldberg was working as an intern at the local sports radio station here in Boston that I listened to, and he had invited me on the Boston Sports Radio to talk about Pogba, ironically, a while back. And we hit it off. Like we had really good chemistry, and I remembered his name. So when I started thinking about my podcast, I knew that I didn't have any time to worry about tech stuff, learn. I'm not tech savvy. I was like, need a good co-host. So I remembered Alex and I reached out to him, and he, knew a little bit about Italian football, but in a way that was perfect because I knew that a lot of my audience wouldn't know a ton about Italian football. So I was like, if part of the podcast is getting Alex up to speed, it'll be good for the audience. That worked out great. Alex, 2 years after, kind of absolutely took off and is doing incredibly well. He still has time to do the podcast with me, which is great. So twice a week we do that. And, at first, our slogan was like, come for the transfers, stay for the calcio. So my idea was like, if someone's going to listen because they want to hear more about Pogba to Man United, let me see what else I can do to get them interested in Italian football. And I like to think that we've had a decent turnover of people there. Now, granted, I completely realize that, during the transfer season, if we have a timestamp on, a rumor on Bruno Fernandez or something like that, I know a lot of people are just going to that, and that's fine too. I really appreciate people going to that too. But the idea is trying to make a show that people are going to listen to in a lot of different ways. And, I mentioned pop culture, which is, both my parents are musicians. I'm a movie buff. I love movies. So let me see if I can incorporate that. And that's worked out really well. It actually served us great during international breaks when there's not too much to talk about. We could do a pod more, leaning more on music and movies. Then during the COVID era, when there were no games, that was a godsend because for us, it wasn't a gimmick to then pivot to these sorts of things because we had always done it. So, we tried to create a show that was unique, that would appeal to a wide audience. We've done better than I ever expected that we would. Now, the landscape with podcasts has really changed. Like sometimes I joke around, like, are you even on Twitter if you don't have a podcast to promote? Because sometimes it feels like that. But I'm the most guilty of this myself. So it's like I totally get this. So yeah, now obviously the podcast field is incredibly competitive. There's a ton of great Serie A podcasts, and a lot of the guys that were guests on my show now are doing their own, and God bless them, I would do the same. So, it's a little, more competitive, but that makes me also makes me want to double down on what makes my podcast unique. So now, we've been going a lot of guests from Italy, and it doesn't mean that a guest from Italy is going to be better I mean, I'd be hypocritical. Here I am calling you from Boston, US, and a lot of people are like, how the hell do you know so much about Italian football? How do you know all these people? So I'm not, but I think there's definitely a big value on hearing a lot of these people that are only heard in Italy, never abroad, and there's a different perspective there on calcio, and that's worked out really great. We've had, some guests that have become absolute regulars. Some of the people from Italy, you also, I never have to question their ability as far as knowledge of calcio when I bring them on, because I wouldn't invite them if I didn't know that they know a ton about calcio, but you never know about the language. It just so happens that the person that ended up being maybe my best guest, Napoli outsider, shameless plug, he's on today's podcast. He became a regular. It so happened that not only was he absolutely brilliant on football, brilliant on finance, similar background as mine, so we could go deep on finance, and also speaks perfect English. So you also need luck sometime. That also made my show a lot better. Now he's a regular for our patron subscribers. Once a month, they know that he comes on and that we have a long chat. So yeah, the podcast landscape is very competitive now. So I always tell people, try to figure out what you have to bring that can make your show a little bit unique, but also something that's going to appeal to a lot of people. But at the same time, there's a lot of people trying to appeal to a lot of people in the same way, and almost the same program, if you will. So you have to try to break the mold. And another thing that I would tell anyone that's getting involved with podcasts is, I think formats are really, really important. Here I am talking a ton, breaking format, but in general, you kind of need a structure and a format, and try different things. If you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough, in my opinion. It's easy to play it safe. And for a while, I used the same format over and over again. But after a while, you got to shake it up a little bit. So don't be afraid to try. And also, if something doesn't work, don't be afraid to cut base and try something else.
I mean, it's fair to say that the Serie A is pretty much your bread and butter. What have you made to the start of the season so far? Who stood out the most?
Yeah, Serie A, obviously, because I grew up in Italy. And I have to be honest, I do have a lot of interest. Like, I don't watch too many other leagues, but Serie A, I watch a ton. Even right now, Sassuolo's about to kick off. Yeah, I mean, Serie A, like most leagues we are seeing with COVID, there's just incredible amount of uncertainty. Maybe a very optimistic Milan fan would have predicted Milan being in first place right now. Sassuolo has kind of become my favorite team in Serie A now, but I wouldn't have predicted they would be in second place going into this game. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Obviously, the timing of positive COVID tests can have such a swing on the league. Look at Ibrahimovic, missed matches against two newly promoted teams, comes back for the derby. Had that been different timing? Look at Hakimi. He's out first game in the Champions League. So this season, I think we all have to accept that it's just going to be very different. And I'm of the opinion that I'll take any football over no football at all, even if it's not, perfect and how I'm used to it. So so this season should be very interesting. I think Juve absolutely are going to be in the mix when you have that much talent. You definitely will be, but with the decision to go with Pirlo, say they had brought back Allegri, I would say, okay, it's almost a lock that Juve is going to win this again. Inter can definitely compete with them with that team, but with Pirlo, it's a complete uncertainty still 4 games in. We know Inter has a very, very strong team. There are a couple of questions about their defense. Also, this Conte pushing this team maybe too far. How motivated is even Conte to be there? And then, we have Atalanta, which is a great X factor. They can win any game, but also we saw against Napoli, they also do have once in a while these stinkers. But I think Atalanta are definitely going to be in the mix because of this COVID environment. The thing about Atalanta that for me is very smart is they doubled down on their strength. They had already a very strong attack, and they were actually fairly deep because they had Muriel off the bench as a bench player. But then they added two more strikers. They added Lammers from the Dutch league, and he's looked really good. And Miranchuk, who from the Ukraine, and he's supposed to be a stud and already scored. So to me, Atalanta was smart because God forbid something happens with COVID, their defense stinks no matter who's out there. But what they need is a good attack. And they have so many options that even if they have 2-3 players out at a time, they'll be able to do well. So I think they are well put in for that. And then we have Napoli, who have a great squad. I think adding Bakayoko at the last second was such a nice move. He was great for Gattuso at Milan. I know people that only saw him at Chelsea. I know the version you saw. He was a completely different player.
Yeah, I'm a Chelsea fan.
Yeah, so but trust me, he's been great so far in the first few games. So, Napoli will also be in the mix. So it should be a very fun season. And Serie A, of course, with the understanding that with the virus and the pandemic, every game's a blessing. Like Sassuolo's on right now. I'm thrilled because who knows how many more times we get it.
100%. And obviously, I'm a Chelsea fan, follow the Premier League. I know the sort of rules and implications and regulations they put in place to come back effectively. With the Serie A, you watching it regularly, have the Serie A done enough to come back effectively and run a smoothly ran league?
So, there was this big thing about Napoli not showing up for the game against Juve. They obviously lost that 3-0, got a point deduction. And look, I know it was a very controversial thing. And anytime Juve is involved, it then becomes much more controversial just because they are in it. I mean, in that situation, though, I genuinely don't know what Juve was supposed to do. Now, granted, they had these tweets before the game with the lineups and the player arriving, and you could say maybe that was silly knowing that Napoli wasn't there, but whatever. That's neither here nor there. But that is to explain that in Italy, there is a protocol that, if a player tests positive, he has to quarantine, has to isolate from the team. At the beginning of the year, right when COVID broke, the rule was you have one positive test, the whole team has to quarantine. Now, obviously, you have that. There's no way you're going to get games in. Like, that's just impossible. But if you say, okay, you have 3 or 4 players that have COVID, you isolate them. The protocol in Italy is you have 13 players and one of them is a keeper. You can go play the game. And if you have 13 healthy players, you go play the game and that's it. Napoli decided not to go. The local health authority supposedly didn't authorize them to leave the region. Granted, a lot of other teams have been able to show up for games. And then Napoli plays in the Europa League against a team that had 13 players with COVID. They show up with their reserves and they beat Napoli, which in a way was kind of ironic. So I have to say, I think that protocol makes sense. If you want to get games in, I don't see any other way, right? I mean, like you have 13 players. Okay, you're playing. I know it sucks, and I know everyone's like, oh, it's not fair. Well, what if it's your key player? Like, I get all that. But I think we just have to accept these are unprecedented times, and it's just going to be different. So Napoli didn't want to follow the protocol. Let's see if it was just that one game and it so happens because it was Juve, but other teams have been doing it. Genoa was the team that played Napoli and they had 13 cases. And then they played the next game with like a bunch of reserves and they were able to get a point against Verona on an away game. So I think, every team's been impacted. So I think in Italy, the protocol kind of made sense, but Italy is, a pretty creative place when it comes to rules. So, let's see how it goes.
I mean, you look at the top 5 leagues across Europe right now. I mean, it's just so hard to call who's going to win it right now. And even with the Serie A, obviously, you've got AC Milan top of the league. They've done some decent business over the summer. Ibra's still firing at 38, 39. What have you made of their start? And is there some sort of resurgence in the AC Milan side, or is it too soon to call?
Yeah. Look, so many of us that love Italian football, unless you're an Inter fan, really kind of want Milan to come back, right? Because that's really important for Italian football. They are absolutely absolute signature club, not just for Italy, but for world football. So we've all been waiting for this. And we've had, a few times where we were like, maybe this is happening. We saw Bonucci and Higuain go there. We're like, okay, maybe this is happening. That didn't work out. But I have to say, bringing back Zlatan seems more than anything to have done the trick. Now,
Yeah,
Milan also did make a manager change, and I don't want to dismiss what Pioli's done because he's done great work. Pioli had coached Lazio. He had brought him to the preliminary round of the Champions League. He's a veteran coach in Italy. Maybe not a sexy name by any means, but definitely an above average coach to say the least. He was at Fiorentina. He had to deal with a situation when the captain Astori died before a game. So he had handled that well. Then he went to Milan when they had hired Giampaolo, who was a disaster. And to Pioli's credit, he got off to a pretty good start, but then Zlatan arrived and everything changed. At Milan, not only did Zlatan score, he just made so many of those young players better. He really helped their confidence, professionalism worked out really well. Çalhanoğlu, which looked like a player, like a total bust, has turned into one of the best midfielders in Serie A. Frank Kessie has become an absolute stud of a defensive midfielder. Milan has improved so much that Tonali, who was their big signature acquisition of the summer, in my opinion, he's going to have a hard time breaking the starting lineup for a while. But to me, if you're a Milan fan, that's great news because more than anything, that tells you that things are improving. So they've done very well. To me, the question with Milan is, how long is Zlatan going to play? I don't put it past him to play another 2 years. The other thing, though, is, right now they've been playing behind closed doors, and it's one thing for a young Milan player to play at San Siro with no fans. It's a whole other when there's a lot of people. So we need to see how that goes. Now, obviously we don't know for sure how big of an impact, and maybe it's an impact for some players, not all. So let's see what happens there. But look, if you're a Milan fan right now, you have to be thrilled. The problem for Milan is I know there's Milan fans that are like, can we win the title this year? They haven't been in the Champions League for a while. The last team that won the Scudetto without going to the Champions League for a while was Conte's Juve 10 years ago. Is Milan as good as that Juve? Maybe. But to me, what's really different is the league overall is much better. Back then, the league was really pretty weak. That was actually Zlatan's last year at Milan in that time. But Milan was really on the way down, and everyone else was really not very good. So to me, for Milan to win the title, not only do they have to unseat Juve, they have to worry about Inter, they have to worry about Atalanta, they have to worry about Napoli. We haven't even mentioned Lazio. I don't think they'll be in the mix, but there's a lot of good teams. So I think if you're a Milan fan, you have to be thrilled, but I think you also have to be realistic. I think if you're a Milan fan, if you were offered today fourth place, which is an automatic Champions League spot, I would take that right away. I would just sign for that. If you want to dream for the Scudetto, go ahead. But when I look at the landscape of the league, I would do that. And that would already be a massive step forward for Milan. So, no, there's a lot to be excited. But the only thing is how much is Zlatan and how long can that sustain? But as long as he's there, Milan can beat really anyone in Serie A. And you wouldn't have said that for a while.
And you've mentioned, obviously, the likes of Sassuolo have gone off to a brilliant start. And Atalanta, they're always a team to watch. And I'm a big fan of Gasperini. What he's achieved over the last couple of years is nothing short of phenomenal. Taking like a mid-table club, to say the least, to a team constantly competing for Champions League spots. Would you say those are the teams to watch this season, like the dark horses, if you will?
Absolutely. And, too, they're going to be the most fun teams to watch. So, Atalanta, you're always going to get a lot of goals, also because at the back they are shaky, but they are going to be extremely fun to watch. You are right. Gasperini has done a sensational job there. Atalanta, just as a club, how they're run, it's just absolutely brilliant. Like they've sold Kulusevski and Traoré to Juve and Manchester United. Just the fact that they are selling players to clubs of that caliber for huge amounts of money. And these guys weren't even on their senior squad. So Atalanta's been the best storyline in Serie A. I thought they were the best team last season. I know Juve won the title, but for me, they were the best team. They made a killing there. And what I like is they reinvested it in making their stadium better. They couldn't play their home games in the Champions League because their stadium wasn't up to standard. They used money from transfers and from qualifying in the Champions League to redo their stadium, which looks really nice and modern. In Italy, that's really the best you can do, really, with a stadium, is that. And they've bought really good players. And I like this idea of like, oh, we're going to sell our homegrown players for huge sums of money, pure profit. There's no amortized value to get rid of. And then we're going to try and find these gems in other leagues. And then if they turn out, we bought them for nothing and we can sell them for huge amounts of money. Like Lammers and Miranchuk, they spent like 25 million combined for those two players. They could sell them for 80, like probably within 2 years. So just brilliant club, not just Gasperini. He's great. So you're going to be very entertained. They play three at the back, and it's really three at the back. It's not three at the back. That's really five at the back. So they really three at the back in offense. Sassuolo, I think, are like Atalanta is like the band that now everyone knows. But now if you want to be the guy who knows the cool up and coming band, Sassuolo is almost breaking out. I think a lot of people now know about them, but they're great. They're wonderful. They have a great manager like Gasperini, De Zerbi. Actually, Di Marzio years ago told me, oh, watch out for this guy, De Zerbi. He was coaching Foggia in southern Italy. Then he ended up going to Palermo. It didn't really work out, but he was really tactically very offensive-minded. Like I would say, like Sarri 2.0, maybe even a little bit more modern. And Sassuolo's just great. They play four at the back, so more classic. They build up from the back. They have some superb players. Like Chelsea fans are familiar with Balga, who's been great for them.
Yeah.
He hasn't played yet this season because of COVID, but he's been sensational for them. They have Berardi, who's been on the team for a while. He's been sensational since COVID. Since Calcio came back with COVID, when he came up, people thought he was going to be kind of the Italian Robin, and obviously he's not quite that good. Don't get me wrong, but he's got that sweet left foot that is really fun to watch. And they have this young midfielder Locatelli, who was a Milan big prospect, and he's great at Sassuolo. I think he's very comparable to Tonali. It actually would surprise me if he has as good, if not a better career than Tonali. And it wouldn't surprise me if Locatelli goes to Juve pretty soon. They desperately lack kind of that regista type midfielder.
Yeah.
So definitely watch Sassuolo. Definitely a lot of intriguing players on there.
How do you rate Andrea Pirlo as a manager? And is this a season where we could potentially see the title go to the likes of Inter Milan, AC Milan? Could Juventus be dethroned this season?
Yeah, I think there's a chance. You know, on my podcast, we always kind of look at Scudetto odds and right now. And we always, I think ever since we had the podcast, we always had Juve as over 50%. So basically you could take the entire rest of Serie A and we still felt better about Serie A, Juve winning it than any other team in Serie A. I absolutely do not think that this year. I would, if you gave me the bet, Field or Juve, without a doubt Field, and in years past that was not the case. So look, Juve still has a ton of talent. They started off the season without Dybala, without De Ligt, and De Ligt was really, really good for Juve. Don't let Barca fans on Twitter make you think otherwise. He was shaky at first, but he was a badass after. So De Ligt will be back soon. That'll be a huge bonus for him. So Pirlo obviously has a lot of talent on the team. I loved Sarri, but I knew he was not going to be a good fit at Juve personality-wise. Did not fit by all the interviews, even by what the Juve president said. There was just no chemistry with Ronaldo, with the Senators. So Sarri had to go because of that. the senior players on Juve wanted Pirlo. A lot of them played with him. I'm sure Ronaldo has respect for him. A lot of the others played with him. So the Senators got what they wanted. So that's fine, but they better deliver for him because they're going to make him look bad. And, there's a lot of reports that Pirlo was one who really pushed hard for Chiesa. They got him too. So let's see what happens. Look, it's a small sample size. I've been somewhat impressed. The game in the Champions League was probably the best one, but it was against a very weak opponent. I think, there's also a fine line between being bold and being arrogant. And I think Pirlo, with his lineups going with a lot of these unknown players, moving players around, you can make a case that it's really dancing on that line, boldness and arrogance. And I think a lot of people, because he is someone who has no background as a manager, was just thrown there, are going to very often lean on the arrogant over bold. So he needs to, but at the end of the day, it's a result-driven business, especially at Juve. So that's really what's going to drive it. But I think, look, Juve has amazing talent. They really weren't listening that much to Sarri. They were doing what they wanted anyway. So now they do it with their manager. But I do think they will be challenged for sure.
Obviously, I'm just a bit cautious of time. So I've got a couple of quick-fire questions for you, if that's okay.
Right, go ahead. Yeah, absolutely. Go for it.
And obviously, the last time an Italian side won the Champions League was Mourinho's Inter. The classic days, growing up as a footballing fan, I just enjoyed watching that side. Who realistically will be the next Italian team to win the competition?
It's hard because the Champions League really can be a crapshoot. And, who would have thought that Atalanta would be the Serie A team to go the furthest? And they were in stoppage time away from going to the semifinal. I mean, it's crazy. And who knows what would have happened? I know Bayern are really unbelievably daunting, but it would have been really fun to see. So I don't know. I mean, I think the easy choice is obviously Juve, especially as long as they have Ronaldo. Look, this year with Liverpool, Van Dijk's out. Who knows? This season feels like a crapshoot as much as it's ever going to be. So who knows? Look, I think the easiest pick is Juve, but a team like Atalanta with their style of play, to me, would be probably better suited for it. And to Napoli, who have had very tough draws in the Champions League, but they've actually done really rather well, even facing up against Liverpool 2 years in a row and up against PSG. So Napoli, I know they're in the Europa League this year, but they have a very promising team. And Osimhen, who was their big acquisition, he looks absolutely awesome. So I don't know. I'll tell you what. I'm going to put Napoli as a dark horse. They are actually the Italian team that has qualified for European competition for the longest streak, even more so than Juve. And Napoli are very solid financially. So no, I'm going to be bold, and I'm going to say maybe Napoli does it next year or the year after.
How do you assess Italy's chances of success next summer? Because I know they've got the likes of Switzerland, Wales and Turkey in the Euros, and that is a very, very tough group to say the least. How do you assess how far can they go next year?
Well, Italy has a very nice team. And look, this Mancini took over after the debacle of not going to the World Cup, which, for a country like Italy with 4 World Cups is really shameful. But I think since then, things have gone really well. There's a lot of talent, especially in the midfield. Like Italy's midfield is just stacked right now. Jorginho and Verratti have worked out well as kind of the double regista. Barella, who's been playing for Inter, sensational, a great box-to-box midfielder. Barella, a real stud. So, and that's who's been playing regularly, and they have a lot of other options. I mentioned Locatelli, they have Tonali, they have Pellegrini on Roma. And then, of course, the Zaniolo, unfortunately, we thought that it was a blessing in disguise that the Euro was pushed back a year because he was recovering from his first ACL.
Yeah.
But hey, he might recover in time for his second. And the defense, I still think, is solid. Like, it'll be Chiellini's last one, and even without Chiellini, you have Bonucci, you have Romagnoli, you have Acerbi on Lazio, who's a really good player. The problem for Italy is they really lack a center forward desperately. Like, Immobile, sensational at Lazio, puts up a ton of goals. Just not even remotely comparable on Italy. I really like Bellotti on Torino. I think he's probably their best option, but he's not a big volume scorer, especially for Italy. So they're really lacking really at that one position. But maybe, Zaniolo, when he comes back, maybe they can put him as a center forward. Maybe that'll be less taxing on his knee, and try that. So let's see what happens. But I think Italy can be a nice dark horse at the Euro. Like, granted, I think France, Germany, England, those really, really great teams. But I think Italy, more than the Euro, should really take a look at the World Cup after. I think by then more of their young players will have emerged. But I think if you're a fan of the Italian national team, you have to be thrilled with what Mancini has done. I think he's done a great job. He wasn't afraid to use players that were bench players at the club level and also players that played abroad. Italy's very parochial. Other managers were like, if you don't play in Serie A, I'm not calling you to the national team. And Mancini's credit, he hasn't been that way.
Just another quick one. Obviously, this is from our host, Mason Shatwell. Obviously, he's thanking you for coming on. What's been your best moment in the sporting industry of football? You could be growing up or even now.
So I'll tell you, well, obviously Italy winning the World Cup in 2006 was pretty massive. It's one of those moments that I remember, exactly where I was when it happened. That's been great. For me personally, in my career, I think, getting to ESPN for a while was a big dream of mine because of all the writers that I was on. But for me, it's like having the respect of some of the writers that I've grown to know fairly well and having them treat me as their equal. For me, that never ceases to amaze me. That's definitely the thing that I'm the proudest of. But yeah, in the football, it definitely has to be 2006 World Cup Italy win.
And just one more question for me. I appreciate your time. I'm in my final year at university and I'm training to be a journalist. What would be your advice to those wanting to succeed in the sports media industry?
Okay, very good question. So I'm just going to repeat, a couple of the things that I've already said. I think perseverance, being reliable, being someone who's consistent, that is something that's going to serve you well anything in life, not just journalism. And then again, trying to figure out what you have that is fairly unique, but that can appeal to a fairly large audience, and to try to make it really about your audience. Again, I know, and this might be because I'm older and all, I know that there's a lot of people that do really well just on their sheer personality. And so basically also realize what are your own strengths and weaknesses and try to focus on that. And then this is really a relationship business at all levels. Journalism really is. So, never burn your bridges. Like, I've worked with people that then surpassed me, and also, try to have a class because, I've had peaks and then I've gone down a little bit. So, you're never as great as you think you are at your best moment, but you're also never as crappy as you think you are at the lowest. So that's my other advice. Treat people with dignity and respect. That's always going to serve you well in life, no matter what you do in journalism as well. And just respect your audience. That, at the end of the day, I think is the most important.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely perfect. Thank you so much. And obviously, for those watching at home, David's social media links and his links to his podcast will be in the description. So you want to check that out. It's not worth a miss. I mean, you need to hop on it seriously because it is worth your while. David, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I know you're a busy guy right now. Wish you all the best in the near future. And yeah, thank you for coming on, mate. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, James. I had a great time being on your show. I really appreciate you having me. So all the best and best of luck with your career. Okay.
And you, mate. Take care.
Ciao.
Bye.